Uh, Good evening to all the people who come to the lecture, and apologies beforehand for the delay. We had run into some technical glitches, and so I'll make this short and I'll hand over to Dr. Nagi. Uh, yeah, and just the housekeeping quickly. If you The talk will go for about an hour approximately, with a bit of flexibility, but there. And once the talk is finished, then we'll hand over. The audience can ask whatever questions they have, and if they wish to make a contribution, that's welcome as well. And way to do it is you can either type in your questions in the chat, or there is the hand icon. Just press on that and wave, and that will show up your name. And so I'll call up the people as they come. And please make your questions brief. Don't take more than 2 minutes to ask a question. And I'll ask Dr. Nagi to keep the answers about 5 minutes to 6 minutes, depending upon the number of questions we have. So if we don't have too many questions, then that's okay. We can spend a little bit longer on each question. But otherwise, we'll have to ration the time. And meanwhile, I'll ask the people in the core to get ready with some questions and type them also. And now I'll hand it over to Dr. Nagi. Dr. Nagi, as we have said in the introduction, is a columnist, writer, and a doctor as well, based in Sydney. And he's the author of the book God's Republics, The Making and Unmaking of Pakistan and India. And he's been a regular columnist on world issues and developments for a variety of online and print publications, both in Pakistan and all over the world. So now I'll hand over to Dr. Nagi. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, comrades, and thank you for having me here. I'm going to start from this book, and I'll take most of my material right from here, but not the latest one, what is happening. And I hope I will be able to read from here, and you'll be able to see me. Actually, I've started in a very non-conventional or unconventional, unorthodox way this time, because I thought that engaging my audience is more important, and probably I'll break in between and I'll ask the questions in between, because I know our concentration span doesn't remain intact for more than 10 minutes or so. So I think 10 to 15 minutes maybe. So I'll keep probing and provoking you to invade me, to attack me, and ask in between also. So I'm going to start it from Adorno's saying, a very famous saying of his. He said that poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric. But consider the darkness and the great cold in this wail which resounds with mystery. Brecht completes the sentence, and it seems as if he stopped short of naming the wail, which is Gaza. In another poem, Brecht says, in the dark times, will there also be singing? Yes, there will also be singing about the dark times. When a tragedy is soul-wrenching, and the struggle is so one-dimensional that one side is mercilessly slaughtered in cold blood, while humanity, in its numbness, watches it in its alienated silence. For the oppressed, poetry becomes an integral part of their struggle. Perhaps that is why Freud said, everywhere I go, I find a poet has been there before me. Before becoming the target of assassination by the IDF, better called IOF, Israeli Occupation Force, the famous Palestinian poet and professor of English, Rafat al-Arir, wrote a last poem. I'll take the liberty to recite few lines. If I must die, you must live. To tell my story, to sell my things. If I must die, let it bring hope. Let it be a tale. Inspired by his poem and disgusted by Zionism's metaphor of mowing the lawn, I added, if I have to live, it's a long poem, but I'll cut it short. Uh, if I have to live, the occupation must end. If I have to die, for which I am not shy, it would barely matter if the fountain of my blood, drained by the Zionists, remained unseen. But once it seeps into my land, it must water the planted seeds, seeds for the immortal flowers. And when they bloom, they cannot be mowed by the tank of the enemies. They would act like mines in my Palestines, laid in the ways of my enemy to explode if they are moved. If we have to die, you won't live either. A promise we are making of taking you to Hades and making you cry on the battlefield and in the corners of your homes, begging for your life to see another day when the crimson sun, drenched and drowned in our blood, rises again. Your bodies will shiver in its frozen light with damning fright. Death will knock at your doors, hidden behind the walls. You built very tall with apartheid bricks. The doors and wall will creak and fall, enter our soul through the alleyways of your crimes, slain by you in unlit pathways. The walking dead will escort you to where you belong, to the graveyard of history, to intern your remain in Nazi's domain, for you mowed our lawns, where our kids once played, and death was the price they were condemned to pay. An eye for an eye, said the scripture you recited day after day. Will it change if the tide is turned, and if you find yourself at the receiving end? If are true, the rules must apply on the Amalek and the chosen ones alike, with even-handed savagery described by you, with your arsenal of chicanery. Once it's done, the world will see who are the Amaleks and the star-crossed chosen ones. Herbert Marcuse carries out the best critic of Western civilization by saying that a comfortable, smooth, reasonable, democratic, unfreedom prevails in advanced industrial civilization, a token of technical progress. The next sentence is more powerful. We submit to the peaceful production of the means of destruction, to the perfection of waste, to being educated for a defense which deforms the defender and that which they defend. Palestinians did not cry havoc and let loose the dogs of war on the word of Jewry. The word ghetto came from Venice, a place where the Jews were kept in a secluded area under the malignant gaze of Christian guards. Pogrom means riots or to wreak havoc, was adopted by the English lexicon from the Russian language. However, the word was not meant for the Jews alone, but for all undesirable communities like Russians, Soviets, communists, and all that. But like anti-Semitism, it was monopolized by the Zionist ruling class as a best-selling commodity. The word Holocaust is derived from the Greek holocauston, meanings a burnt sacrifice offered whole to God. Auschwitz happened in Poland and not in Palestine, where the process is repeated by the Jews on the Palestinians. A tyranny of the once powerful over the natives. Instead of making room for Jews in the oppressive states, the metropolitan capital decided to cleave Palestine, but later gifted all to the Zionist lobby. To understand Palestine, especially, and the oppressed global South generally, let's pay a visit to Marx. The process of production, Marx says, appears merely as an unavoidable intermediate link, a necessary evil for the sake of money making. All nations with the capitalist mode of production are therefore seized periodically by a feverish attempt to make money without the intervention of process of production. It's very simple that most of the nations, they do not want to go enter into productive process and engage labor and all that. And there's like financial capital, they want to gain the wealth straight away. So and the capitalist anarchy takes them to such a blind alley, and they look for some kind of resolution. The war provides one such resolution. It helps to realize the accumulated capital, first through destruction and later through construction. In peaceful conditions, when the realization of capital becomes impossible, capitalists, according to Marx, decide to throw the capital into the sea, which means they start a war. Money, by coming to motion, becomes capital. And this is not all. It solves many problems. For instance, the army of unemployed laborers become the cannon fodder for the war. Overproduction of commodities and surplus humanity is consumed. The so-called freedom and democracy are suspended, and the government runs the economy according to the need of the dominant classes. All wars and conflicts are started to resolve the economic question. Before we go into Palestine, we need to go back to the state of US economy before the Second World War, when recession plagued the country and the situation became so grim that the state had to intervene in the market, protect the economy from the market, which is interesting, actually. Roosevelt's new economic deal was a kind of a command economy. The victory in the war, the partial repression from the British and French, the opening of British occupied markets through prophylactic decolonization, a beautiful term coined by Marxist historian Eric Hobsbawm, reinvigorated the American economy. It came out of its hibernation to become an imperialist power, needing hegemonic institutions such as the CIA, the Pentagon, and the military-industrial complex, whose expansion scared President Eisenhower, but it ran over him. As long as the USSR remained a force, despite fighting the hot wars in Korea, Cuba, and Vietnam, the US avoided invading the countries of the global South directly, though it backed the white apartheid South African regime, the FNLA in Angola, helped to overthrow Jacobo Arbenz, Patrice Lumumba, Nkrumah, Sukarno, and later Lunde, and many other non-conformists. Although akin to the USSR, the US was among the first countries to recognize Israel as a state. However, its support for Israel was lukewarm, because for the most part, Israel remained and acted as a British surrogate, as Herzl thought, and Herzl said that about, and served British interest, especially the Arab world. Most of it was recently independent, but had massive oil resources, and also helped in guarding the Suez Canal, the sea route between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea for Britain, which till then maintained its iron grip on the most important passage. Once Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, and in return was attacked by the British, French, Israeli Naxos. The defeat of the imperialist allies became possible not only because of the strength of the Egyptian army and the nuclear threat to the allies by the Soviet Union, but also of the neutrality of the US empire. That was the first time when Soviet Union's relations otherwise it supported the Zionist state. They were strained. The straining of relations with the Soviets helped Israel join hands with the US against the Soviets. Despite Eisenhower's threat to Israeli, British, French Nazis to stop the war or face sanctions, his administration was soft on Israel. But Kennedy had little sympathy for Israeli nuclear ambition. He was not keen on Israeli anachronistic colonization project and considered Nasser the hero of Arab nationalism. He also opposed Israeli nuclear ambition and forced Ben Gurion to get the Dimona site inspected regularly, which led to the resignation of Ben Gurion as premier. Kennedy promised Nasser and the other Arab heads of states to support the UN Resolution 194 for the right of return of Palestinian refugees. The secret showdown between Kennedy and Ben Gurion on the nuclear saga was revealed by two books. The Simpson Option, a book written by Seymour Hersh in 1991, and later Israel and the Bomb, written in 1998 by Avner Cohen. The Israeli newspaper, Haaretz, kind of a liberal, left-leaning or whatever, published a review of Cohen's book on February 5, 1999, which reads, "The murder of American President John F. Kennedy brought to an abrupt end the massive pressure being applied by the US administration on the government of Israel to discontinue the nuclear program." Now, here comes the role of Jewish lobby as well. Now, I think that's very important to discuss because a couple of people, actually high profile people have actually addressed it, like Elian Pepe and Mr. Finkelstein. And the latest book of Elian Pepe is about that, actually. So, long story short, until that moment, Israel was not the blue-eyed child of the US. Considered a partner of Soviet bloc, the US administration worked with it rather ambivalently and according to its interests. But by then, Zionism had already built a strong lobby in the US, both in media, which later became American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, or APAC. The Jewish lobby controlled the media and banks from the start. For instance, Kennedy was averse to the idea of appointing Lyndon B. Johnson as his vice president. But Kennedy's insider, Arthur Schilsinger, in his book 1,000 Days, published in 1965, wrote that it was Philip Graham, the publisher, and Joseph Elsaw, a columnist of the Washington Post, both strong supporters of Israel, convinced Kennedy to take Johnson on his ticket. After the press came the bank. John Kennedy soon received a visit from Zionist financier Abraham Feinberg, who had already financed Truman in exchange for the recognition of Israel, who said to him, "We know your campaign is in trouble. We're willing to pay your bills if you will let us have control of your Middle East policy." Kennedy was no saint, as Oliver Stone is making us believe nowadays. He was as lethal in Vietnam as any other US president. But his assassination brought Lyndon B. Johnson to the fore, and the 1967, are you getting me, comrades? Hello?
Yes, we are.
Are you getting me, my voice or anything? Because I don't see anything.
We are getting you. Just sometimes it tends to delay, but we can hear you. And yeah.
Right, wonderful. Please let me know when you can't really, because I have no means to know from here actually. So kindly let me know when you don't.
Of course.
So Kennedy was no saint, as Oliver Stone is making us believe nowadays. He was as lethal in Vietnam as any other US president. But his assassination brought Lyndon B. Johnson to the fore and the 1967 Israeli war. The Israeli attack on USA Liberty, an American espionage ship in the Mediterranean Sea, the high-tech weapon provided to him by Israel to fight in Vietnam, altered the relations. Johnson also needed financial support from Jewish billionaire for the next presidential elections and was promised. Israel became an ally of the US in the Cold War. Incidentally, even today, 5 Jews make Forbes' list of top 10 wealthiest Americans. In his latest book, Zionism on Both Sides of Atlantic, Ilian Pepe mentions the role of the American Zionist Council, the precursor of AIPAC in American politics. The American Zionist Council, or AZC, collected money from the US to support the kibbutz in Israel. But a chunk of money returned to the coffers of the American Zionist Council. Senator William Fulbright, I mean, we hear about Fulbright scholarship nowadays, so he was the guy. Chairman of the Committee on Foreign Relations, conducted an audit on the American Zionist Council, the concluding report of which recommended that it must be registered as a foreign agent and therefore subject to the obligations defined by the Foreign Agents Registration Act of 1938, which would considerably limit its influence. In the next election, to defeat Fulbright, the American Zionist Council filled the coffers of his opponents. Soon afterwards, AIPAC opened its offices in Capitol Hill and started to threaten the American senators for the consequences if they had the temerity to oppose the Zionist lobby by opposing the state of Israel. Since then, the question raised by Brzezinski became an existential one, haunting all and sundry. Was America an Israeli mule, and was the dog wagging the tail, or was it otherwise? Recently, Jamal Bowman and Cory Bush, the vocal supporters of the ceasefire in Gaza, have lost their elections. The APEC has invested more than $9 million against them, a fact admitted by Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. I have given all these relevant hyperlinks in this particular article, so it can be provided as such. Nothing is without an authentic, actually, links. The recent speech of Netanyahu in the US Congress, where the Shakespearean devil cited the scripture to serve his purpose and was applauded by the equally imperious and impious creatures in the Congress, was the consequence of millions of dollars the APEC poured and continues to pour in congressmen's coffers. They were not applauding to an imperialist agent, but to the privileges, pulp, and perk that come with the applause. Hasn't the Jewish question written by Marx gained its relevance again? Money, Marx in Jewish question says, is the jealous God of Israel, in the face of which no other God may exist. Money degrades all gods of man and turns them into commodities. Money is the universal self-established value of all things. It has therefore robbed the whole world, both the world of man and nature, of its specific value. The God of the Jews has become secularized and has become the God of the world. The bill of exchange is the real God of the Jews. His God is only an illusory bill of exchange. Now, in brief, Marx wants to say that the God of Israel, the Mammon, which he calls, has become the God of the universe, and the Zionist lobby is making comprehensive use of it. It wouldn't be out of place to mention Gramsci's concept of God in exchange society, which has nothing to do with it, but again, much to do with it. The concept of God is closely linked to the concept of property and proprietor. The proof of the existence of God was based on the necessity of postulating an owner for the world. How could anyone believe that a property so vast, so desirable, so rich in resources belong to nobody? Whether the word has a first cause or not may remain open to question, but the necessity of the first owner should be self-evident and beyond doubt. Now, coming to recent Israel-Palestine conflict, things are no different. The settled colonial states of the world are fighting to control the resources of the Middle East through war, without involving the evil necessity of the process of production. Nevertheless, it has cleared all the ambiguities relating to master-slave relationship between the US and Israel. The world's much hyped technological power could not sustain itself against guerrilla warfare without the continuous help of the Europeans, especially of Germans, and the US military industrial complex. The US is participating in the war directly by shooting down the drones fired by Ansarullah, called Houthis, and by the Iranians. The US fleet, Eisenhower, stayed in the Mediterranean for a long, but once it was withdrawn, how they successfully managed to target Jaffa, now Tel Aviv. The one-dimensional support of Israel by the US, UK, Germany, France, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, all settled colonial states, has made this conflict a struggle between the global North or global Israel versus the global South or global Palestine. The latter comprises South Africa, Iran, Syria, Libya, Iraq, Yemen, Venezuela, Colombia, Chile, Bolivia, and the rest of the oppressed world. The recent Guardian report reveals that an estimated 60,000 US citizens live in settlements in the West Bank. An estimated 23,380 US citizens serve in Israeli armed force, according to Washington Post. As I've mentioned in my book, God's Republic, Israel has always taken pride in killing the leaders of its opponents, picking them in isolation and killing them through terrorist attacks. Even there is a wide suspicion that the secret hand behind the assassination of President Kennedy was that of the Israeli state. The Israeli showdown between Kennedy and Ben Gurion on the nuclear question was revealed by, it's already mentioned, has been revealed by a couple of those books. Now, Kennedy's assassination mystery aside, the Israeli state has killed several Iranian high-profile journalists in the past. The killing of General Qasem Soleimani did not augur well for the US because it was responded to by the Iranian attacking the US base in Iraq and destroying it. The recent killing of Ismail Haniyeh, the head of Hamas, a moderate who never touched a gun in his life, is another example of state terrorism. Israel also assassinated Fuad Shukr, a seasoned Hezbollah leader, on the same day. Lest we forget, for a brief period, Haniyeh opposed the Syrian government of Assad while supporting the US-backed revolt in Syria. And probably, Fuad Shukr, there's a rumor that he fought for Al-Qaeda or something like that in Yugoslavia. In his iron cage, Rashid Khaldi states, yellow leaders who were assassinated between 1968 and 1991 included Abu Ali Ayyad, Ghassan Kanafani. I mean, the entire art and literature of uh, uh, Palestine was killed when Ghassan Kanafani was killed. Beside that, Said Hamami, Abu Yusuf al-Najjar, Kamal Nasser, Kamal Adwan, Majid Abu Sharir, Abu Hassan Salami, Brigadier General Saad Sial, Isma Sirtawa, Abu Jihad, and Abu Ayyad. According to a documentary released by Al Jazeera, Yasser Arafat was also poisoned by the Zionist authorities. Now, there comes a very interesting question, I suppose, and I think everyone should be curious to know about, to ask the answer. And if anyone has the answer, I would love to have it, to listen from the person, really, because there are multiple complicated answers on it. Why to keep such a state intact or alive? So, despite Cold War becoming a history, why do the US and Europe continues to support Zionist entity without borders and constitution, especially when the surrounding Arab states have already been aligned with the US? Why it is impossible to get rid of Zionism and taking control of Palestine by instilling a puppet regime akin to Mahmoud Abbas, from the river to the sea, where all three monotheistic religions could exist cordially. After all, the experiment was successfully carried out in South Africa, where the white ruling class was replaced with the black one, while the entire superstructure economic base remained untouched. The central bank was deregulated, and economy was dominantly controlled by the white capitalist class even now. There could be many reasons for denying that option to the Palestinians. One, very important, according to Noam Chomsky, the USA supports Israel not out of benevolence, but because it is useful for US policies. They have cultural relations and have backing from Christian Zionism, which is part of the demographic base of the Republican Party. Extremely anti-Semitic, but pro-Israel. For Elian Pepe, it was Christian Zionism that promoted Jewish Zionism. Zionism, he says, has a special affinity with American settler colonial project because the settlement of North America was also derived from reading of the Bible and from the idea of pilgrimage to a holy land or a new Jerusalem. Now, this is very interesting. I mean, this came to me something very new. I never knew that about previously. He says that across the United States today, you can find towns called Bethlehem, Canaan, and even Zion. There were thus two cities on the hill. This is the expression American settler had for the new colonies they built on Native American land. One they built with their own hands out of nothing, and that is in America. And the other was in Palestine. This piece comes from his latest book, Zionism on Both Sides of the Atlantics. In my view, the following three factors are extremely important. One, the defeat of Zionism in Palestine is likely to open the revolutionary situation on an imperialist language, a Pandora's box in the entire Arab world. Ghassan Kanafani stressed that the Palestinian problem could not be solved in isolation from the Arab world's whole social and political situation. But I think the uprising of the freedom fighter has suggested otherwise. From the US, UK, and Germany, the three ardent supporters of Zionism, to every country in the world the Palestine question has raised a tempestuous response. It looks as if Palestine will solve the Arab question, if not today, sometimes in the future, albeit it must have to go through another revolution under the banner of another Bolshevik party. Second possible reason, which I have mentioned in my book as well, alludes to the discussion between Noam Chomsky and Eliane Pepe. They suggest that beside the indigenous resistance in South Africa, Cuban military intervention played an instrumental role in ending apartheid in South Africa. The Cuban strategically sent mostly Black soldiers who drove the South Africans out of Angola and Namibia, of course. It gave a psychological boost, which is very important, actually. Here comes, I think, Frantz Fanon, basically, who says that we are the prisoners of our color. The black man is a prisoner of his color. So it gives a psychological boost to the Black Africans and broke the myth of invincibility of the white man. When Mandela came out of jail, his first comment was to praise Cuban for their help. Today, the freedom movement cannot rely on Cuban support, and no Gaddafi is around to extend monetary help to the fighters as he did to the South Africans. Despite his unfortunate international situation, Chomsky is sanguine and reminds us about the Arab Spring, which bewildered the Israelis, seeing young secular Egyptians who manifested and believed in everything the Israeli, at least, allegedly believed in as well, whether it was liberalism, democracy, and so on. And yet, they were very clear about Palestine, including in the sign that they were carrying. A combination of highly committed young Arabs to both the idea of Palestine and democracy frightened the Israelis, who would be much more comfortable if the pro-Palestinian sentiments were packaged in an anti-democratic way. Now, this is another fantastic thing, which I think we never knew, and perhaps I never knew. I don't know, the rest of the people knew it or not. In the early stages of the Arab Spring, Chomsky says, a very significant solidarity was developing between American, European, and Egyptian activists. The Arab Spring began around the time of Wisconsin's uprising. There were messages of support from Egyptian labor leaders to Wisconsin's activists, and conversely, Occupy people went to Egypt. Another aspect of the Arab Spring that cannot be discussed in the USA for ideological reason is the role of labor. The militant labor movement was very significant, both in Egypt and in the US. It was one of the lasting achievements and a substantial boost in opportunities for labor organizing, which had been crushed under the previous regimes. Another equally important factor impeding Palestinian liberation is imperialism itself. The world is gradually heading towards multipolarity. Well, some people might doubt it, but anyway, the age of US hegemony and domination seems to be in decline, though it still controls the world through its military-industrial complex and NATO. Its dollar is still hegemonic currency, but despite all these advantages, the dialectical process cannot be controlled. It takes its own path. A new bloc comprising Russia, China, as we call BRICS, has emerged, threatening to wean the countries of the global south from the clutches of the dollar. The Saudi-Iran partnership is something of a magic done by China. A country's pressure on Arab countries is likely to slow the process of de-dollarization. And a parasitic state such as Israel can help the US in this process. Israel not only helped the US control South Africa, Namibia, and Zimbabwe, but many countries in Latin America. Before Gustavo Petro became the president, Colombia was identified as a second Israel in Latin America. Now, a ravaged, war-torn Ukraine is doing the same. The world is heading towards recession. Now, from where we took our start, we are coming back here. Let's see what's happening in America itself now. The US is no exception. It is in recession now. The White House is in disarray. Replacing Biden with Kamala Harris at a critical juncture highlights the political chaos overwhelming the power structure. The reemerging of Trump with the fascist slogan of America First signifies the state of US economy. The US debt has surpassed 35 trillion. It's around 35.6 trillion now. After Japan, China is the biggest lender. If an alternative currency is afloat, the US will soon find itself in dire straits. There's no way back to the Roosevelt era. The US wants to start a war with China on the Taiwan issue, but it is in the interest of China to avoid it. The US is facing an identical situation to that of Israel. Israel wants to enlarge the war to other parts of Middle East. For the US, it will be a war for the realization of accumulated capital. For Israel, a matter of survival. Now, Nagi, I think I've come to another point that what factors can end this conflict or actually play a role in ending this conflict. And out of them, which is very strange and paradoxical, in fact, is the prolonging the conflict itself. An important factor which possibly is going to play an important role in the outcome of conflict will be the Israeli economy. The longer the conflict goes on, the flight of capital from Israel will be inevitable. According to Reuters, Intel Corp is halting plans for a $25 billion factory in Israel. Israeli financial news website Calcalists said on Monday in a report that the chip maker did not confirm or deny the news. Times of Israel states that the fear of war engulfing the region has forced 7 airlines to halt their flights to Israel. Northern Israel, as PBS.org news hour says, that is almost depopulated ever since the start of the conflict, fearing Hezbollah's attack on the territory. More than 60,000 Israelis are still evacuated from the northern border with Lebanon. And Secretary of State Blinken said Israel had effectively lost its sovereignty. In one of his interviews in Gray Zone, Max Blumenthal has stated that this is the first time that Israeli territory has shrunken and diminished in size. The port of Eilat became non-functional due to Houthi attacks. Nearly 85% of activity has been lost since the Houthis attack. A small country like Israel cannot sustain these shocks for a long. Second important factor itself is our, I'll say, as Mars said, that there's an internal contradiction in everything. And he takes the example of a stone and a chick and an egg. And he says that if you give a certain temperature to egg, it will deliver a chicken. But whatever temperature you're going to give a stone, it won't do anything good or bad with the stone because stone has not that much internal contradiction as the egg has. So same thing applies here. Israel is suffering from multiple internal contradictions as well. As far as the Palestinian genocide is concerned, there is a consensus in the society. The cleavage created by Netanyahu in an attempt to sterilize the Supreme Court has eclipsed for now. But the hostage situation is very much alive and kicking. The press rallies of the relatives of the hostages have become a regular feature of Israeli society. The recent verdict of the Supreme Court asking the religious Jews who previously were immune to conscription to join the army is furthering the problems rather than solving them. The religious element refuses to fight, even if conscripted. The long fight has also drained the Israeli army. Israeli society that marches on the drumbeats of fascism is turning on itself, and it is neither new nor hidden. Max Blumenthal, in his book Goliath, states that the presence of Arab as enemies is important for the unity and survival of the Israeli state. Once Arabs are removed from the scene, Israeli society, ruled by privileged Ashkenazi, will fall prey to infighting because of class struggle fought in different themes. Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews are treated as second-class citizens. Society is more likely to devour itself. Goliath was written in 2013. 11 years on, Israel has regressed further into the Nietzschean abyss. Then we have another problem, that is schizophrenic fascist population in Israel. Francis Herbert Bradley says, when everything is bad, it must be good to know the worst. In Minima Moralia, Adorno states, a humanity is secretly emerging, which hungers for the compulsion and restriction, which the nonsensical continuation of domination imposes. Courtesy, indoctrination, that inhumanity has emerged in Israel and is dominating the mainstream. If one needs to understand schizophrenia, one needs to understand despair. R.D. Lang was succinct. The failure of Zionist forces in achieving any goal have led to despair. Hence, it finds itself in a state of schizophrenia, making it more sadist. The entire state is an interrogation cell for the Palestinians. In July, the Spanish media El País wrote, the Israeli army's septimian detention, interrogation, and torture center and its field hospital, and some seriously injured are held at all times in a supine position with their eyes covered, their hands and feet tied to the bed, and they are naked except for a diaper, which they use to relieve themselves, and a quilt. Now, right groups, including the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, according to Reiter, have alleged serious abuse of detainees at the Said Diamond camp in the Negev desert. Herod's heading, Said Diamond camp doctor, who saw the abused human detainee, said, I could not believe an Israeli prison guard could do such a thing. And it is very revealing statement, actually, and confirms the torture which is going on. Professor Joel Donchin examined one of the Palestinian detainees who was raped so badly that he had a ruptured bowel, severe injury to his anus, one damaged and broken rib, and he required surgery. The brutal behavior of the IDF moved the doctor so much that in exasperation, he stated, if the state Knesset members think
Sorry to interrupt. Could you please repeat that sentence again?
that there are no limits to
Sorry to interrupt. There seems to be some technical issues.
how much they can abuse prisoners. If they want to maintain a hospital,
Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear me? Hello, Dr. Saulat Nagi, can you hear me? If you'd like, maybe you can log out, come out of Zoom and then come back in. Comrade Nagi, you are muted and we cannot see your video.
is it okay?
Yes, it's okay now. If you could just start, this is much better. If you can start from where you left off maybe a minute ago, like because you froze for nearly a minute.
Right. So I think Professor Joel Donchen examined one of the Palestinian detainees who was raped so badly that he had a ruptured bowel, severe injury to the anus, one damaged and broken rib, and he required surgery. The brutal behavior of the IDF moved the doctor so much that in exasperation he stated, if the state and the Knesset members think that there is no limit to how much they can abuse prisoners, they should kill them, as the Nazis did, or close the hospitals. If they maintain a hospital only to save themselves in front of the International Criminal Court in Hague, it will do no good for them. When those soldiers allegedly involved in the crime were taken into custody for inquiry, the Israeli protesters, including far-right members of Knesset, invaded the two military compounds, forcing the military police to release them because for them, the soldiers were merely doing their duty, which included committing rape. Only a humanity to whom death has become as indifferent as its members, that has itself died. Eterno says, can influence people. According to him, Israeli aren't investigating storming of Oedipus situation has forced Israel to kill the leading figures of its opponents.
Sorry to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt again. Sorry to interrupt again. Could you just repeat the last two sentences that you said?
According to Harar's Israel police aren't investigating storming of IDF bases by far-right mobs, one of the senior officers says. Is it fine, or do I have to go back further?
Maybe one sentence further. It's also for the editing purpose.
I can go back. I can read whole paragraph.
Yes, actually, that would be good if you can.
Yeah. When those soldiers allegedly involved in the crime were taken into custody for inquiry, the Israeli protesters, including far-right members of Knesset, invaded the two military compounds, forcing the military police of Knesset to release them, because for them the soldiers were merely doing their duty, which included committing rape. Only a humanity to whom death has become as indifferent as its members, that has died itself, Adorno says, can inflict the horror administratively on innumerable people, which is his people are doing now, actually. According to hierarchs, Israeli police aren't investigating storming of IDF bases by far-right mobs, one of the senior officials said. The Oedipus situation has forced Israel to kill the leading figure of the opponents. It has become the only way to avoid the castration fear from the forces of Axis by involving its imperialist ally, the US, in its war. In this case, not the son, the father is equally guilty.
Hello, you are frozen again.
The prodigal son killed the father, or father? Yes.
Hello.
In his normal Finkelstein says,
sorry,
do I go back?
Yeah. Just to the beginning where you talk about the father kills the son, or the son kills the father. Just the beginning of that.
I beg your pardon. I couldn't
So,
hear you from where.
When you talk about the father killing the son, I think that's what you said.
Yeah, right.
If you
it's
could,
a Freudian concept.
Yeah, but could you go back to the beginning of when you said that?
Yeah, right. The Oedipus situation has forced Israel to kill the leading figures of its opponents. It has become the only way to avoid the castration fear from the forces of the Axis by involving its imperialist ally, the US, in its war. In this case, not the son, but the father is equally guilty. Would the prodigal son kill the father, or father will ultimately castrate the son, is anyone's guess. In his latest book, I Will Burn the Bridges When I Reach There, Norman Finkelstein says, Israel is rushing towards the abyss and dragging the rest of the world with it. At one pole of this spectrum stand the crazy realist, about whom the sociologist Sid Wright Mill says, they have come to believe that there is no other solution but war, even when they feel that war will solve nothing. They still believe that victory means something, even though they have never told us what it means. He says that Professor Benny Morris falls into this particular category, who knows nothing about, who's not unclear. Finkelstein continues, the documentary record shows that when Israel targets a country, and it's very important actually, when Israel targets a country, nothing causes it to desist from what it intends to do except complete submission by the targeted country. If the enemy force resists the initial provocation, Israel will continue to escalate with one provocation after another until it becomes politically impossible for the targeted entity to absorb further blows. This is what happened when Israel targeted Egypt during the era of Gamal Abdel Nasser in the early 50s. And he also analyzes it on psychological terms that Israel is suffering from Samson's complex. If we recall the movie Samson and Delilah, Samson's actually in the end, killed the Philistia or Philistines. He broke down those pillars around him, and everything falls down, and he himself also dies. So this is what he's referring to, that Israel is suffering from Samson complex, that it will kill the Philistia by killing itself. Despite this pressure, the International Court of Justice has categorically denounced and rejected the occupation of the Palestinian territories as illegal and asked the world community not to extend any help to Israel in the occupation, and has asked the UN, especially the General Assembly and the Security Council, to consider the precise modalities and further action to bring to an end as rapidly as possible the unlawful presence of the State of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory. The International Criminal Court is trying its best to seek an arrest warrant for UN to arrest Netanyahu and Gallant as war criminals. It's happening on the ground. Despite US protection, Israel has become a pariah state, standing limbless with the crutches provided by the evil empire. Even the impregnable economic might of the US corporate world is showing signs of mounting strain. The US will not be able to deliver its guns and bombs to Israel indefinitely. It has captured bigger markets in Saudi, UAE, and other Gulf states. The younger generation of the US and Europe, including Jews, students, and all others, they abhor the slaughter visiting Palestine. The ghetto population has become the first mass base of revolt. Revolution will be next in line. However, the subjective force must overthrow the yoke with its continuous struggle. The cancer will have to be excised by the collective efforts of the surgeons, or else it will linger on. Thank you. Hello? Hello?
Yes, if our host, Comrade Narendra, will speak.
Hello.
Yeah, I can see
Hello.
you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but I can't see you.
Oh, that's okay.
That's okay. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Saulat Nagi. And while we are waiting for the questions, I'll, sorry, where am I? Right.
Can you see me?
Hello, sorry, something's gone wrong. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine, but I can't see
Yeah,
anyone.
thank you very much. Yeah, while we are waiting for the questions, I'll just use my privilege as the moderator and start the ball rolling. Yes, I mean Anthony Lowenstein, look, I mean, I don't know about people in India, but for people of us who are living in the West, the the feeling we have is that the entire imperial system, right from heads of states to business, to corporate heads, to columnists, to liberals, the most seemingly apolitical kind of people, suddenly it's almost as if they have all come and done, collectively stripped themselves of all their pretensions and stood stark naked in front of the world. And I mean, that's the kind of revelation that the young people who have joined the movement, particularly against genocide and for peace, are having. And that, I think, is bound to have its political outcome eventually, probably more in the US too, probably in the near future. But what I'm interested in more specifically is that what's the kind of level in the Arab societies immediately around Israel, because I mean it's a kind of commonplace that the road to Palestinian liberation lies through Jordan, Cairo, and Amman. And Cairo, I mean, Egypt, by all indications, the public seems to have been demoralized after the setbacks it received. But Jordan has been historically quite an accomplice of the Israeli Zionist project in many ways, even going back to the formation of Israel and the war, the resistance war. But also Jordan has about 50% Palestinian ethnicity, and so I'm just wondering if there is going to be some kind of a upsurge in Jordan, well, at least to begin with. Yeah, and what is your assessment? Thank you.
I think it's the most perplexing question, most perplexing and most simple, both in a way, because simple is that why don't they get up and why don't they fight? Because they have the tradition of fighting, and it was the Egypt which was probably the first to bring change over there and had the audacity to take over the Suez Canal without assistance of anyone. Even Soviets didn't ask him, did promise him to if, in the help really, but Nasser went for it because Nasser was confident that he could do it with the help of his people. The people were behind him. But the problem is that the second, I mean, in the '67, when Israel attacked and without any, sort of forewarning or anything like that. So it just destroyed the complete air force of Egypt and Syria. That was a big setback for entire Arab nationalism. And even Nasser himself, he resigned temporarily, but he came back. But the fact is that Muslim Brotherhood became entrenched into the society. Muslim Brotherhood's role was not very positive. It was even in Jordan, they are in power alongside with the king. Its role is otherwise not very progressive. It is a force of status quo, I believe. And even in Palestine, Hamas came as a product of this Zionism, because they thought that they will be able to cleave the resistance into secular and religious sort of things, and they will keep on fighting with each other. But this is one of the factors actually, that the status quo and these religious groups played an instrumental role in playing these sort of negative roles, non-revolutionary roles in those societies. Secondly, I think the uprising, we see that pink tide, so-called, which came in which took over entire of this Arab world. I think it's very early to say anything about it. It's like when somebody asked Joan Lai that what did he think about the 1968 student uprising in France. He said that it's too early to say something about it because it will be decided sometimes. Sometimes much later, and we've come to see that thing that things. What happened over there was initially it was a revolutionary thing, upsurge and all that, and later on it ended up as fiasco. I mean, they gave the freedom, they gave everything to them, but that was a bourgeois freedom, and students got everything which bourgeoisie can give to take it back immediately, their democracy and all that, and that was all. The movement didn't go far, but you never know. It also helped the communist forces over there. And there was a time when president was a communist, coming from the Communist Party. And but once you are in power, then you become part of the same system, unless you come through revolution. But the fact is that these things takes time, and especially Egypt. Egypt is very, very important for the survival of Israel. America will go to every extent uh, to subjugate them, possibly, or by money, or by anything, bribing the ruling class. And you never know how much CIA is actually working over there. Samir Amin was a person like Samir Amin. I would give an example, for instance, who was a Marxist until his last breath. He fell for the Sisi government. I mean, when they overthrew Muslim Brotherhood's government, Mursi's government, even people like Samir Amin supported it, because they thought that it's better to have a secular and government rather than. So there's a lot of indoctrination as well, and there is always, so a lot of money being piled in. And Egypt is the second biggest aid receiver or money receiver from the Americans after Israel. Its army is totally corrupt, and they're heavily paid. And it's like Pakistani army, heavily corrupt, and totally. They would do anything to sell their country. They don't mind really, whatever happens. So it is the similar situation over there in Asia. That extremely corrupt army, which doesn't want to fight for anything. It's just looking for its survival, and which is nowhere actually. And then they still remember that part of '67 war, when Sinai Desert was taken over by the Jews and Zionists actually, and they were not going to leave it unless '73 war happened, and they were pushed back. And then Israel realized that, well, it's not possible to use, ammunition everywhere. It won't work. The war will not work. But the entire society's mind has been changed, and they have been, I suppose that they have been kept in subjugation on gunpoint. You never know, because I remember especially the work of Savak in Iran, that every second person of the family was a member of Savak. He was paid. He or she was paid. Even husband didn't know that his wife was from Savak or not, and vice versa. So it's like there's a lot of intelligence which is working over there. People are not happy, definitely. They want to get up. I think it's a very coercive regimes. Even we can see the coercion of Saudi Arabia openly. They decapitate, they kill people, they can take up their dead bodies, dissolve them in acids, and take away to Israel, as they did to Adnan Khashoggi. We don't know. This could be even worse in Egypt, because Sisi is a totalitarian. A term I don't like to use, but anyway, he's a totalitarian, really. So I think they will rise someday, and they have to rise, because otherwise, I don't see in the future of whole Arab. And that's why I mentioned that Ghassan Kanafani said that the entire Arab solution has to be solved before we can have the solution of Palestine. I think it's other way around. It's the Palestinians now. They have put the stake of liberation very high. One has to die in hundreds and thousands to get some sort of a liberation. So now the precedence has been set that if you want to get your liberty, your freedom, you have to die first, and then next generation can live in a peace. So I think they need a revolution. I don't know how and when, but they need a revolution really in Egypt. And well, Jordan is an artificially created country. I don't believe Jordan has anything, any place in the world. It's only ruling because Americans are sitting there, and they have a pact with the Americans that Americans can use their air, sea, their land at any moment, regardless. I mean, there are no conditionalities attached. So I think CIA is actually ruling them, and they are collaborating. And that king, he can hardly speak Arabic, and George Galloway always says that this man speaks Arabic in English accent. It is a no, and when he became the king, he didn't speak even a single word of English. So this is most unfortunate that these tin pot dictators and these people are being planted and grafted in Arab world, and then they say that Israel is a democracy and they are dictators and all that. I mean, these dictators are actually garnered or planted there by the US. I think your question is very succinct, and in that sense that I think besides that it should be, the people should rise up now. It's the time. If they don't die today, they won't be able to live tomorrow.
Thank you. I'm not sure if there are any more questions.
I
Aishwarya,
have
do
a
you have anything?
yes, yeah, I do have a question.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your talk. I think there's a few questions I had, but I'll start with one, which is about the tail wagging the dog, which you mentioned. Um, so because that is something that I've heard as I've been following this. Max Blumenthal is another one who's I've read one of his books and I've listened to a lot of his talks, and he also ascribes to the tail wagging the dog. It's I understand why that seems to be the case, because as in why people think that, because of the power of AIPAC and the Zionist lobby, and the fact that Netanyahu and the Israeli regime are able to do these assassinations, and even the US Congress is annoyed that he's doing it. But ultimately it looks more like Israel is a very important investment for US imperialism to maintain control in the region and to maintain US dominance. So I was just wondering, where do you stand in regards to whether it's the tail wagging the dog or the other way around, as in who here holds the power, US imperialism or Israel?
I think those, it's very simple. When we've seen historically that Americans go very far to help their dogs. Uh, if you recall, those Nicaragua's head of state, who was I'm just missing his name. It will come back to me. But anyway, somebody asked the American president about him, that he's a son of a bitch. And he said that he's the son of our own bitch. That's the problem. Now, I don't see Israel is a powerful thing. And it has been revealed. The mighty army, the all thing, and the technological power, which I mentioned, these things have actually, the world has seen. And repeatedly, it is being said that if, America moves away for a minute, Israel will not survive as a state because it's not a state. So I still think that either it's not the case of tail wagging the dog, or America's a mule of Israel, because America is working for imperialist interests. You see, there are multiple lobbies in over there in America. There is a gun lobby, which earns billions and kills thousands, kids in the process. There is another interesting lobby which is against Castro, Cuban lobby. They are working there, and they're in California and in the southern states. They actually want to remove Fidel Castro and try to kill him many times. So there are multiple lobbies, but APEC is one of the lobbies which directly interferes in the affairs in American affairs. Why? They're allowed to do that. If we see that if Kennedy can do that, if Kennedy can say them that, okay, if you're not going to show me your cards and you're not going to stop the nuclear power plant in Damuna, and then I can stop your aid. And immediately Ben Gurion had to resign, and a new prime minister came and to negotiate. But in the meanwhile, Kennedy was killed. So there are multiple things which allude to that. For instance, George Bush the first, he told them that either you leave Gaza or in West Bank, or I am going to stop your aid. And they went out from that place. Once I think Obama also did that, because during his immediately after or during the process of electoral campaign, second time, they invaded, but he said no, because he was likely to lose his votes in Michigan and all those places where there's a large number of Muslims, and that pro-Palestinian element is living. So the problem is imperialism, I suppose. It is an appendage of Israel is nothing more than an appendage of entire imperialist structure. And they couldn't hold Bolivia. They couldn't hold like Colombia. Colombia was, how they crushed the FARC movement, which was a communist movement, and they gave lots of sacrifices, and they were terribly crushed. But then they couldn't stop the change when the switchover came. Now the president is openly talking against Americans and openly talking against Israel. So rather, he was one of the first presidents who decided to break the relations with Israel, actually. So things can change, and they are changing. Israel is not indispensable, I think. It's only a part of the whole structure, capitalist structure, imperialist structure, which has to realize its capital. And I think if Palestine can find its own agents like Mahmoud Abbas, why to prolong? Because many things are going against American interests. Sometimes they work against American interests. Killing of Hanaya, killing of Han, these that was not in American interest. Then attacking a Syrian embassy Iranian embassy in Syria was a nonsensical thing. Even Americans were not happy with that. So I think Americans are just tolerating it for the time being, and this is going to take some time, and because this is not ultimate solution, and everyone knows that even Ilan Pape categorically states in his latest book that I don't see Zionism or Israel in this present state, existing in the present state. So is Tariq Ali's latest interview I was listening to, and he said that, well, he said that I met Noam Chomsky before he was sick, and I asked him, and the first thing he said that Israel should be finished. It should not exist at all. And he said it was a shock to me, because I met so many times. I conducted so many interviews of that person, and he called himself a Zionist. actually, which is strange. He says, Noam Chomsky says he's a Zionist, but what kind of a Zionist is he who says that Israel should come to an end, it should finish, it shouldn't exist? So I think there is a large, feeling in the entire world that this state is a pariah state. It has no right to exist, at least in this shape. I'm sorry to say that there's a question over here about the role of the Communist Party. Hadash is representing is in as the replacement of the Communist Party in there, but they're too. It's a too small a party. One of their members actually stood up and he opposed them. They actually wanted to get rid of him, but fortunately he stayed back. I don't expect much. This very very small communist party, and left is non-existent, as everyone knows over there. The president of Israel is a sort of is a labor president. He's coming from labor, and look at him, how reactionary he is. This is the labor Zionism, which once was taken as a socialist model in the Middle East, and Stalin fell for it actually.
Hello.
Yeah, Amber Bashir.
There's a question from I don't know the name. It says Dell, and but I think he asked the question which probably you seem to have covered anyway. Anyway, I'm reading the question for you. It says, what kind of a role is the Communist Party and movement playing in Israel? So I assume you already spoke about it anyway. But that's the question,
because
typed out by someone.
Hadash is the only party, and I think they have 5 members in the entire hall, entire Knesset, and I don't think they are received very well. Actually, socialism is sort of is something which Israel hates the most, unfortunately.
Thank you very much, comrade. I don't think there are any more questions. So
I do
I'll-
have one more, if possible.
yeah,
No.
sure, go ahead. We have about 10 minutes left, so you can ask.
Okay. I'm just trying to think of how to phrase this, but so I've been following the conflict as best as I can, and what I've come to notice is almost there's some. I think you mentioned this in your talk as well. Is the nature of the different divisions within Israeli society, based on the different types of I guess Jewish people. Like there's a hierarchy within that society where the European Jews seem to be at the top, and the further down you go, you get the Ethiopian Jews at the bottom. But almost what unifies them seems to be the hatred and the oppression of Palestinians. And I think you mentioned that this society will start to turn on each other. The Zionist bourgeois and the class struggle within it will start to turn on each other if they don't have a Palestine or a Palestinians, blockaded in Gaza to oppress. So in the and we're seeing it right now itself with what has happened after October 7th, the taking of the hostages, the fact that it has now been confirmed that the IDF and along with the Israeli regime used the Hannibal Directive against their own people, and that's something they've done numerous times. And the actions they've taken so far, which has angered people and caused protest on the street to get the hostages to be returned. I guess my question to you is, what happens to Israel after this? Because right now it looks like a death roll. It looks like they cannot go back to the way things were, and it really looks like October the 7th was the beginning of the end of Israel, the Zionist entity. Would you say that? Do you see it that way?
Yes, once again, my answer will be the same which was given by Ilian Pepe, that I'm hopeful, but because I'm not certain, but I'm hopeful. And he said that why I'm hopeful is because as long as there is a resistance, and as long as the subjective force is working, this is my word. Actually, he didn't say subjective force, but he said that we have to have public or people, they have, but the subjective force is fighting and trying to overthrow this thing. As long as it exists and it continues to fight, there'll be the era of Zionism is over. And I think there's no second thought about it, because uh, these uh, these people don't want to go anywhere. The best part of this struggle is that when death stares in their eyes, when they know that there's no tomorrow, even maybe not the next hour, they actually they are fighting, and they know. I mean, there's nothing that can actually stop them from leaving the place. For instance, I written somewhere that perhaps in this book or in articles that uh, Hitler offered Jews money and boats and ships to leave the country, and there was nobody. And they wanted to leave actually, but there was nobody who could receive them. And you know how Lord Muniz was murdered because he wanted to. I mean, the Jews wanted to take him 100,000 Jews at that time when the war was going on, and he said, "I cannot take 100,000. I mean, where am I going to put them? I don't have I mean, so much room for them." So it was not that capitalism that Muni didn't have room. Capitalism didn't have room for them really. So here, the things are entirely opposite. Even if you give them an opportunity to leave, they won't leave. Palestinians won't leave. They know that this is the last thing they have now left with them. If they're going to leave the place, uh, they are not never going to come back. Israel is never going to give them a room again. So I think the people of Gaza, and some people say that Gaza people of Gaza are not giving any room to leave the place, which is wrong actually, because I recently read that nearly 100,000 Palestinians managed to leave Gaza. But 100,000 is actually nothing out. I mean, there are millions, 2.3 millions, and they cannot go. One thing, they cannot go anywhere. Second, nobody is going to take such a large number of people in the time when capitalism is in recession. So nobody's going to take them. So they have nothing else but to fight, which is a wonderful thing, I suppose. I mean, unfortunate. I mean, I know they're human beings and they're dying and they're in despair. But the fact is that history is unfortunately it's not very kind thing. It behaves in the same pattern. I mean, it never forgives the victim, and it never forgets the victimizer. So both things go together. But I still believe that it's unlike Jews who wanted to leave Germany. These people don't want to leave. Palestinians don't want to leave their country, and they will never. If there had been the case, people of West Bank would have left the country. They still have the option to leave, and they know what's going to come with them next. So, but they are not going to leave it.
Aishwarya, is that all?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Nagi. And there don't seem to be any more questions. And anyway, we have only about 4 minutes or so left before we end the session. So I'll just take this opportunity to thank Dr. Nagi for the talk. And we'll have this on YouTube, and people who missed the talk can just access it from YouTube. And we'll post the channel here in the group. And thank you all once again for being with us today, and good night.